In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. 10,000 worlds burn, brother turns upon brother, and a fallen angel drags half a galaxy screaming into damnation. But on one dying world, in the bloodiest hour of that endless war, something answers a summons it was never meant to hear. Not a demon, not a god of this hell, a god who has already murdered his own pantheon, who tore Olympus from its foundations, who buried his rage under a mountain of ash, and swore never again. They called for slaughter. They reached into the warp for a beast to break their enemies, and they pulled the Ghost of Sparta through the fire. Now the blood god turns his eye. Now a daemon primarch, a slave who gave his rage away, meets the one man in all of creation who fought his own wrath to a standstill, and won. This is what happens when Kratos is dropped into the Horus Heresy, at its bloodiest hour. Written by me, and when this one ends, and you're already hungry for the next, you decide who falls through the rift. Name the universe, name the character, drop them in the comments, and I'll drag them into a world that was never ready for them. The chanting has already begun. The circle is drawn in blood. Let us see what they summoned.
The chamber had been a chapel once, before the Legion took the world. Now the saints were gone from the walls, their stone faces chiseled away and replaced with older names, uglier names, names that itched behind the eyes of any mortal who read them. 99 candles guttered in a ring, and each was made from the fat of a man who had died screaming, and the smoke that climbed from them did not rise straight. It coiled, it reached, it listened. Veloth, dark apostle of the word-bearers, stood at the center of the ring with blood to his elbows and a hymn on his tongue. He had done this 100 times. On 100 worlds, he knew the shape of the ritual, the way a soldier knows the weight of his weapon, knew where the syllables had to bend and where the offerings had to fall, knew the exact moment when the skin of the world went thin and something on the far side pressed its face against the membrane and pushed. This was not faith to him. It had passed beyond faith long ago. It was craft. It was certainty. Above him, chained between two broken pillars, the last of the offerings hung and wept, and did not understand what was being done to him. Veloth barely saw the man anymore. He was a component. A door needs a hinge, and blood was the hinge, and the man had enough left in him for one more turn. "We call the Skull-Taker," Veloth intoned, and 40 throats behind him answered in the low grinding drone of the choir. "We call the Harvest. We call the thing that reaps. Come and break the wall that will not fall. Come and drink what defies us. Come and be given a body of red iron and rage." The Loyalists still held the northern wall. That was the whole reason for this. 3 days the World Eaters had thrown themselves at the fortress line, and 3 days the Defenders had held, and Angron himself had gone quiet in his war camp, in a way that frightened even his own butchers, and so the word-bearers had offered their solution. A greater demon of corn, pulled screaming into the material world, poured into a waiting engine of brass and bone. Let it walk the northern wall. Let it end the matter in an afternoon. Veloth had summoned such things before. He knew their hunger, their shape, the particular red flavor of their attention. He knew what was coming. He was wrong. The candles did not gutter toward him. They bent away, all 99 at once, as if a wind had come from the center of the ring outward, and the smoke that had been reaching toward the thin place recoiled and fled to the corners of the chamber and hid there. The hanging man stopped weeping, not because his pain had ended, because something in the room had grown so much larger than his pain that his body simply forgot to feel it. The blood on the floor began to move. It did not pool the way it should. It ran uphill, toward the center, gathering into a shape, and the shape was wrong. Not the towering brass and fury silhouette Veloth had built the whole right to receive, but something smaller, denser, a thing the size of a man, if a man could be carved from the root of a mountain and given the patience of stone. The choir faltered. Veloth did not. "Hold the hymn," he snarled, and drove the words on, because a ritual half-spoken is a door half-opened, and a door half-opened is how a legion dies. The center of the ring caught fire, not the clean warp fire he knew. This was older. It came in 2 lines, 2 arcs, twin points of burning gold that fell out of nothing and slammed into the stone, and the chains that held them glowed red as a forge heart. And Veloth felt, for the first time in longer than he could remember, a flicker of something he had thought burned out of him centuries ago. He felt afraid. The fire resolved into a man, broad, scarred, ash-pale, a slash of red paint or old blood running down across one eye. He was on one knee in the center of the circle, both fists planted against the stone, and around each forearm a chain of seared iron coiled up to a curved blade that still dripped fire onto the chapel floor. His head was down. His shoulders moved, once, with a breath as slow and deep as tectonic plate grinding on plate. For a moment, the chamber was perfectly silent. 99 candles, 40 warriors of the Word-Bearers Legion, giants in crimson ceramite, veterans of a rebellion that had cracked the galaxy in half, and one kneeling man in the middle of their circle, wreathed in fire that was not theirs. Then Veloth did what he had always done. He reached out with the will the ruinous powers had honed in him across 2 centuries of devotion, the psychic leash he laid on every summoned thing, the collar of syllable and blood and command that had bound greater demons to his service and made them heal. He reached into the kneeling shape and he took hold and he spoke the word of binding. "You are called," he said, and his voice filled the chamber like a struck bell, layered with the harmonics of the warp. "You are bound. You are given purpose. Rise and obey the kneeling man raised his head. Veloth had looked into the eyes of daemons. He had stared into the furnace gaze of things that had feasted on the terror of whole cities, and found them, in their way, comprehensible. Hunger was always comprehensible, but the eyes that found him now held no hunger at all. They held something Veloth had no framework for, because he served gods who traded in appetite, and this was the opposite of appetite. It was refusal. Cold, bottomless, ancient refusal, worn smooth over more years than the Legion had existed, the look of a thing that had been leashed before, by masters far older and far greater than a dark apostle of the 17th Legion, and had killed every one of them. "No," said Kratos. The binding did not break. That was the thing Veloth would not have time to understand. It did not break, because it never took hold at all. His will slid off the man in the circle like water off oiled iron, found nothing to grip, no ambition to inflame, no despair to widen, no fear to feed. Nothing but that flat final refusal. A soul that had already told every god in existence exactly what it thought of being owned, and had backed the sentiment up with their corpses. Kratos rose. He did it slowly, which was somehow worse than speed. He unfolded from the floor one movement at a time, and the chains on his arms sang softly as the blades came up, and the fire along their edges brightened until the whole chamber swam in red-gold light. He looked at the blood running uphill toward his feet. He looked at the flayed skin nailed to the walls, the older names carved over the saints, the candles of rendered men. He looked at the offering hanging broken between the pillars, and something crossed his scarred face. Not softness. Kratos had buried softness a long time ago, but recognition. He had stood in rooms like this. He had been the thing chained to the pillar, once, and he had been the thing that did the chaining, and he had learned to despise both. "Another circle," he said, low, to no one and to himself. "Another god who thinks a man is a tool." Veloth found his voice, to his credit, and he had precious little worth crediting. It did not shake. "You do not understand what you are, creature. You do not understand where you stand. This is the domain of the blood god. You were called here to serve a purpose greater than." The blades of chaos moved. Later, the 2 word-bearers who survived the chamber would not be able to agree on what they had seen, because what they had seen did not happen at the speed the eye was built to follow. One moment the ash-pale man stood at the center of the ring. The next, the chains had lashed out to their full length, a whip of fire and iron 8 meters long in each hand, and the ring of 40 giants was no longer a ring. The first 2 never even registered as enemies to Kratos. They were simply in the arc. The burning blades took the closer one through the gorget where the ceramite met the helm, and the word-bearer's head left his shoulders in a spray of superheated blood that flashed to steam against his own armor. The chain snapped back, reversed, and the second blade opened the next warrior from hip to opposite shoulder, ceramite parting like cloth, the fire cauterizing even as it cut, so that the 2 halves of the traitor Astartes stood upright for a full second, before they understood they had been divided. Then the chamber came apart into noise. Bolt pistols came up, 40 of the finest killers the long war had produced, primed in an instant from ceremony to slaughter, because whatever else the World Eaters and their word-bearer allies were, they were never slow to violence. The first volley of bolt rounds tore across the ring, mass reactive shells that could turn a mortal man to red mist, that had cracked tanks and gutted Xenos monsters, and put down loyalist heroes. They struck Kratos, some of them. He was already moving, and a god who had dodged the lightning of Zeus did not find bolter fire beyond his understanding, but the chamber was close and the volume was immense, and 3, 4, 5 rounds hammered into his chest and shoulder and detonated. Against a man, that was death many times over. Against Kratos, it was a hard rain. The mass reactive charges cratered against ash-pale flesh, and blue fist-sized wounds that closed even as the blood flew. Because the thing they were shooting was not a man, had not been merely a man in a very long time, was the murdered and self-remade god of war, who had walked out of the underworld more than once, with his own death in his hands, and refused it. He staggered a half-step, he bared his teeth, and then he was among them, and the chains were everywhere. Veloth stopped chanting. There was no ritual left to protect. He fell back toward the chamber door, Crozius rising, mind racing through 2 centuries of dark theology for the counter, to a thing that had no name in any grimoire he had ever bled to read. A summoned entity that could not be bound. A killer that shrugged off bolt fire. A being that had walked out of the fire wearing the ashes of the dead like a second skin, and looked at a dark apostle of the word, at him, the voice of the gods on this world, with contempt. Around him his brothers died, not easily. The world eaters attached to the ritual guard threw themselves into the fight with the joy of their kind, and one of them, a champion with a chain axe screaming at full rev, actually landed a blow, a downward stroke that would have split a tank. Kratos caught the whirring teeth of the chain axe on the crossed blades of chaos, and the impact drove him down to one knee and cracked the flagstones beneath him, and for a heartbeat, the champion leaned in with all the strength of a transhuman body and the fury of the butcher's nails. Kratos looked up at him through the shriek of grinding metal, and there was no strain on his face at all. Only that same cold, ancient patience. "You fight," Kratos said, "like everything else here. All hunger, no control." He surged upward. The champion, who masked half again what Kratos did in his mountainous armor, left the floor. Kratos drove him back the length of the chamber and through one of the broken pillars, and the pillar exploded into rubble, and the offering that had hung there fell free at last, dead long since, released. Kratos put the champion down against the far wall, and the blades of chaos followed him there, and what happened against that wall took perhaps 2 seconds, and left nothing worth calling a warrior. When it was done, the chamber held Veloth, 2 word-bearers frozen at the doorway who had chosen in that moment that their devotion had limits after all, and Kratos, standing in the wreck of a ritual that had reached across the void for a monster and gotten a god instead. The blood on the floor had stopped moving. The fire on the blades burned low and patient. Kratos looked at the dark apostle across the ruin of the summoning circle. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, and the quiet was the most terrible thing in the room. "Your god wants blood," he said. "I have given gods what they wanted before." The chains tightened, the blades rising, the fire climbing once more. It has never ended the way they hoped. And somewhere far above the chapel, past the burning fortress and the ash-choked sky, out in the red immensity of the warp where the blood god kept his brass and endless watch, something vast and ancient and hungry turned, slowly, for the first time in an age of the galaxy, to look down at a single point on a single dying world. Khorne had felt the killing, and Khorne was interested. The 2 word-bearers at the door ran. It was not a thing warriors of their legion did. They had knelt before the flayed altars of 100 worlds and watched their own brothers offered up to the gods without flinching. They had waded through the slaughter of the heresy singing hymns. They did not flee. But something in them, some animal part older than doctrine, had watched a summoned thing tear their circle apart and refuse the leash of a dark apostle, and that part had taken hold of their legs before their faith could stop it. They fled into the smoke-choked corridors of the fortress cathedral and did not look back. Kratos let them go. He had never enjoyed hunting the ones who ran. There had been a time, in the Red Years, when he would have run them down for the pleasure of it, and he remembered that time the way a man remembers a sickness, with revulsion, and with the knowledge that the fever could return if he let it. He turned instead to the one who had not run. Veloth had backed to the chamber's far wall, Crozius raised, and he was doing the only thing left to a servant of the word who had lost control of his summoning. He was bargaining. "You are wasted here," the dark apostle said, and the grinding stone voice had found its rhythm again, the practiced cadence that had turned worlds to the worship of chaos. "I feel what you are now. I mistook you for a beast of the blood god, but you are older than that, are you not? A god in your own right, a slayer of gods." He risked a step forward, hands spreading, the grimoire swaying at his hip. "Do you know where you have come, Slayer? Do you know what walks this galaxy? There are powers here that would make you a prince. The blood god alone commands more skulls than there are stars, and he rewards the strong. He does not chain the strong. He crowns them. Serve, and every enemy you have ever." I have heard this speech. Kratos said it without heat, which was worse than any shout. He walked toward the apostle across the wreck of the circle, and the blood that had run uphill now squelched under his tread, ordinary again, going cold. "A god offered me the world, once, told me my rage was a gift, told me I was made for slaughter, that I should embrace what I was, that there was a throne waiting, if I would only serve. The blades dragged along the flagstones, throwing sparks. I served. I did everything they asked, and when I had burned everything they pointed me at, I understood the truth. Your kind never says aloud. He stopped an arm's length from Veloth. A god who calls you strong only means you are a useful weapon. And a weapon does not get a throne. It gets used, until it breaks, and then it gets replaced. The blood god is not Olympus, Veloth hissed. You do not comprehend. They are all Olympus. Kratos' voice dropped lower. Every one of them. Different masks. The same hunger. Wearing the faces of billions. Calling it worship. He looked at the flayed skins on the walls. The 99 guttering candles of rendered men. You have made a temple out of murder and called it faith. I have stood in that temple. I built one, once. Out of the bodies of everyone I loved. Something ancient and grieving moved under the cold. It is not a place a man walks out of clean, but he can walk out. Veloth swung the Crozius. He was a word-bearer of 2 centuries' war, and the strike was not slow. The skull-headed mace crackled with the borrowed lightning of the warp, and it came down in an arc meant to cave the slayer's skull. Kratos leaned aside from it the way a mountain might lean aside from a thrown stone, caught the haft below the head in one fist, and the unholy energy that wreathed the weapon poured into him and found, again, nothing to burn, no fear, no ambition, no soul door for the warp to lever open. It guttered against him, and died. Your magic is a key, Kratos said, for a lock I do not have. He closed his hand. The Crozius Arcanum, a relic weapon consecrated to the dark gods across 100 rituals, proof against the blows of loyalist champions, crumpled like foil, the sacred metal shrieking as it deformed, the warp light in it snuffing out. Veloth stared at the ruined thing in disbelief, and in that half-second of disbelief, the god of war took him by the throat. He lifted the dark apostle off the floor. Ceramite and all, the giant traitor came up, boots kicking, and Kratos held him there and studied him, the way a man studies an insect he has not decided whether to kill. I am going to let you speak, Kratos said, because I want an answer, not a corpse, yet. His grip tightened enough to make the point. Where am I? What is this war? And who is the master you were so eager to hand me to? Veloth could have kept his silence. Some deep flint of devotion in him wanted to. But there is a thing that happens to even the most zealous soul when it hangs in the fist of a power it cannot bind, cannot burn, cannot bargain with. And what came out of the Dark Apostle was, for the first time in 2 centuries, the plain truth. He told the Slayer of the Galaxy, of the Imperium of Man, 10,000 worlds under a single deified emperor, of the great crusade that had reunited the scattered children of humanity under that emperor's banner, and of the War Master Horus, the emperor's most beloved son, who had turned against his father and dragged half the legions into rebellion, and of the war that now consumed the galaxy from rim to rim, the heresy, the bloodiest hour of a species that had known nothing but bloody hours. He told him of the Primarchs, the demigod sons the emperor had made, each one a general and an army and a force of nature, half of them loyal and half of them fallen, and he told him, because the fist demanded it, of the master of this world, Angron, Veloth rasped, the Red Angel, Primarch of the World Eaters. The gods have already claimed him. He is becoming one of their own, a daemon prince in the making, the blood gods chosen. He commands this war host. It was for him that we summoned a beast to break the loyalist wall. A terrible laugh bubbled up through the crushing grip. You want to know your enemy, Slayer? You have already made him. When Angron learns that his own priests reached into the void and pulled out a killer who murdered his honor guard and spat on the blood god's collar, he will not send warriors. He will come, and there is no wall in this galaxy that has ever held him. Kratos was quiet for a moment. A son, he said slowly, made by a godfather, to be a weapon, given rage he did not ask for, and a war he cannot leave, chained by the thing in his own skull. He was not looking at Veloth now. He was looking at something a long way off, and a long time ago. And now the gods reward him by turning him into one of them, so that he can never stop, so that the killing never ends. You pity him. Veloth's disbelief was real. No. Kratos' gaze came back, flat and cold. I know him. He tightened his grip a final fraction. That is different. And it is worse, for him. He did not crush the Dark Apostle's throat. He had gotten what he came for, and there was a colder use for the creature. He drew Veloth close, until the ruined helm lenses were a handspan from his scarred face. Go to your Red Angel, Kratos said. Tell him what walks his fortress now. Tell him a man came through his priest's fire who will not be bound, will not be burned, will not be bought. Tell him I have killed gods who were older than his, and I am tired, so tired, of being called to do their work." The fire on the blades flared. "And tell him this. If he wants the thing his priest summoned, he can come and collect it himself. I will be waiting on the wall his warriors could not take." He opened his hand. Veloth dropped, caught himself, and did not run so much as retreat. With what dignity 2 centuries of dark faith could muster from a man who had just been dismissed like a servant. At the chamber door he paused, and some last splinter of the priest in him had to speak. "You do not understand what you have chosen, Slayer. You could have had a crown. Now you have only the wall, and the angel, and an ending." Kratos had already turned away from him, toward the corridor that led up and out toward the sound of the guns. "An ending," he said, "is the only honest thing a god ever offers. At least this one. I choose." He went up through the cathedral toward the war. The fortress world had a name once. Veloth had not said it, and Kratos had not asked, because names did not matter to the dead, and this whole world was dying. He climbed through corridors where the Legion had made its progress in the usual way. The walls painted with the manner of the murders done against them. The loyalist defenders who had been caught here left as warnings. The chapel-turned-slaughterhouse repeated in 100 smaller rooms. Everywhere the reek of blood and burnt promethium and the copper and ozone wrongness of the warp bleeding through where too much killing had thinned the world's skin. Kratos walked through it without slowing. He had smelled worse. He had made worse. Twice, packs of world eaters found him. The first pack was 6, and they came at him howling, the butcher's nails in their skulls driving them past thought into pure ecstatic violence. And it was over in the time it took the echo of their war cry to fade. Kratos did not hate them. That was the strange thing he noticed. Distantly, as the blades of chaos worked, he could not hate a thing so thoroughly enslaved. They believed they were free. They believed the red joy in their skulls was theirs, was strength, was choice. He had believed the same thing once, in the service of Ares, and the memory of it kept his face still, even as he took them apart. He killed them cleanly. It was the only mercy the moment allowed. The second pack was 10, and one of them was smart. The champion at its head did not charge. He saw 6 of his brothers dead in the corridor behind the ash pale killer, and he understood, in the brief lucid window the nails allowed him, that this was not a fight to be won by joy alone. He held his warriors back. He fired. He fought a retreat, trading ground for time, trying to funnel the intruder into the open ground of the fortress's great processional hall, where numbers and bolter fire could tell. It was good soldiering. Kratos, who had led men and killed men and been men's ruin across 2 worlds worth of war, recognized it as good soldiering, and it changed nothing. He gave the champion his open ground because the open ground suited him too. In the great hall, under a vaulted ceiling, where the loyalist frescoes had been defaced with the 8-pointed star, the 10 world eaters spread wide and opened fire, and Kratos went low and fast beneath the storm of bolt rounds, and reached the first of them before the volley found its rhythm. He fought differently here. Not the whirlwind of the chapel. This was patient, positional. A butcher's geometry that kept the pillars between himself and the guns, and brought him to each warrior in turn, so that their numbers never counted for what numbers should. When the Leviathan axe was called for the 2 who tried to flank him wide, it came to his hand out of nothing, frost runes flaring pale blue, and he buried it in the first flanker's chest, and recalled it, and buried it in the second, before the axe's frost had finished spreading across the first one's dying armor. The World Eaters had never seen a weapon leap back to a bare hand across 10 meters. It broke something in the rhythm of their assault. It made them, for the first time in a long time, uncertain. The champion died last, and he died facing the Slayer, chain axe locked against the blades of chaos, close enough to see the ash-pale face and the cold eyes, and to understand, in his final lucid instant, that the thing his legion had summoned was worse than anything they had meant to catch. "What?" the champion managed, through the grinding lock of the weapons. "Are you?" Kratos held the lock a moment longer than he needed to. It was a question he had been asked by many dying things, and the answer had changed across the long years of his life, and it had finally settled into something simple and true. "A man," he said, "who is done serving gods." Then he ended it, and the great hall was quiet, and beyond its shattered windows, the northern wall burned against a sky the color of old blood. Kratos walked to those windows and looked out at the war he had chosen. The fortress line ran for kilometers along a ridge of black rock, and along its length, the loyalists still held. Kratos could see their gun positions, their banners, the small determined shapes of men and transhuman warriors who had refused to break for 3 days against the tide of the World Eaters. And below them, filling the ash-choked valley from wall to horizon. The war host of the Red Angel seethed. Tens of thousands of them, armor and titans and the crimson swarm of the Legion, and somewhere in the heart of that host, a presence Kratos could feel even at this distance, the way a man feels a storm before it breaks, vast and burning, and full of a rage that had been building since before this galaxy learned Kratos' name. Angron had felt his priests die. Angron had heard, by now, the message Kratos sent, and Angron was coming. Kratos set the blades of chaos against his back, and for a moment, the god of war simply stood in the broken window and watched the storm gather, and there was no fear in him. There had been a time when he sought death and could not find it. There had been a time when he feared it more than anything. He was past both now. He had crossed a whole ocean of rage and grief to arrive at a quiet that no god had been able to take from him, and he would defend that quiet, the only way the galaxy would understand. Far out in the seething host, something the size of a dreadnought spread vast leathery wings, and the whole valley shook with a roar that was equal parts fury and agony, the sound of a son screaming at a father who could no longer hear him. 10,000 years, and a galaxy of war compressed into a single note of pure murder. Kratos heard it, understood it, answered it under his breath, to the burning dark. "Come then," said the Ghost of Sparta. "Let us see which of us the gods made stronger." The Red Angel came to the wall an hour before the false dawn, and he did not come alone, and he did not come quietly. Kratos had spent that hour on the loyalist side of the northern wall, and it had been a strange hour. He had walked up out of the fortress cathedral and into the gun lines of men who had every reason to kill him, and for a tense span, it had nearly come to that. A company of Imperial Army soldiers, and a scattering of loyalist Astartes in battered warplate, who had watched an ash-pale giant walk out of the enemy-held cathedral, wreathed in fire, and had leveled every weapon they owned. It was a loyalist space marine, a sergeant of a legion whose heraldry Kratos did not know, who had stayed the trigger, something in how the stranger carried himself. Something in the fact that he came trailing the blood of world eaters, and not of loyal men. They had not become allies. Kratos did not do allies, not anymore, not easily. But the sergeant had asked him, bluntly, whose side he fought on, and Kratos had given the only answer that was true. "I fight the ones who summon slaves and call it strength," he had said. "Tonight, that is the host below your wall." After tonight, he had not finished. After tonight was a country he had stopped visiting a long time ago. So they let him stand on their wall, a killer of unknown origin, planted at the point where the loyalist line was thinnest, where 3 days of assault had ground the defenders down to exhausted men, holding a broken rampart on discipline and spite. The sergeant did not trust him, but the sergeant had eyes, and the sergeant had counted the dead world eaters, and a wall that thin will take help from strange places. Then Angron came, and the question of trust burned away, because there was room in the world for only one thing, and that thing was the Red Angel's rage. He did not walk. He fell upon the wall from the ash-dark sky, wings spread, and where he landed the rampart did not crack. It ceased. A section 30 meters wide simply gone. Defenders and stone and gun emplacements erased in the impact, and the shockwave threw men from their feet for 100 meters in either direction. Kratos kept his feet. He had felt the tremors of titans falling and mountains breaking. He set his weight and rode it. When the dust and pulverized rock cleared, the god of war looked, for the first time, upon a Primarch. Angron was larger than Kratos had let himself imagine. Twice a space marine's height, and the Astartes were giants. A being of blood-red flesh corded with muscle that had been built for the arena, and then remade for slaughter. Scarred everywhere. Every scar a fight survived and a rage remembered. The butcher's nails jutted from his skull in a crude crown of iron, and where they entered the flesh the blood ran black and never clotted. And Kratos understood at once what he was looking at, because he had been chained too, though never like this. The wings were new. The wings were the blood god's gift, leather and brass-veined and vast, the mark of the demonhood settling into him. And the eyes were the worst thing, because behind the furnace-red demonic glare there was still, buried impossibly deep, a person, a soul screaming inside a body that no longer obeyed it, a slave watching his own hands do murder and unable to stop them. Angron looked across the ruined rampart, past the fleeing men and the dead, and found the ash-pale figure who had not fled, who had not fallen, who stood on the broken wall with fire coiled around his arms, and looked back at a Primarch, with something no mortal thing had ever shown the Red Angel. Not terror, not worship, recognition. "You." The word came out of Angron like a landslide. Gorefather and Gorechild, the The great chain weapons screamed to life in his fists. You are the thing my priests pulled from the void, the thing that killed my honor guard. That refused the blood god's collar. He advanced, and each step cracked the rampart under him, and the surviving defenders scattered from between the two of them like sparks from a struck anvil. They said you cannot be bound. They said you spat on the gods. The furnace eyes narrowed, and for a fractured instant, the person behind them surfaced, ragged and desperate. How? How do you refuse them? Tell me how, before I kill you. Tell me. There is no trick. Kratos' voice did not rise, and somehow it carried under the Primarch's thunder. And you want a secret? There is none. Only a choice, made every single day, until the day you die. The gods put a fire in me too. I have carried it my whole life. I have let it burn everything I loved. He unslung the blades of chaos, and the fire climbed. The choice is not to be free of the fire. That is the lie they sell, that if you serve enough, kill enough, you will be free. You will not. The choice is to be the one who holds the leash on your own rage, not them, not the thing in your skull, you. For one terrible heartbeat, Angron listened. Kratos saw it. Saw the person surface all the way. Saw the slave who had led a rebellion of gladiators on a dead world and been stolen from his own death by a father god's whim. Saw 10,000 years of a mind flayed by the nails reach toward the ash-pale stranger's words, like a drowning man toward a spar. And then the nails fired. Kratos watched it happen, watched the cortical implants surge and drown the person, watched the black blood run and the furnace eyes empty, watched the blood god's leash, the leash Kratos would never wear, cinched tight around the one being in this galaxy who most wanted to be free of it and could not. It was, Kratos thought in the last still moment before the violence, the cruelest thing he had ever witnessed. He had killed his own family, and it was less cruel than this, because his crime had been his own. Angron's was authored by others, renewed every hour, forever. There is no choice, Angron howled, and it was not the Primarch speaking anymore. It was the wound in him. There is only the blood, there is only the killing, and you will feed it like all the rest. He came like an avalanche. Kratos met a Primarch of the Emperor of Mankind on a broken wall at the bloodiest hour of the bloodiest war that galaxy had ever known, and for the length of that fight, the rest of the battle simply stopped, because no soul on either side could look away from it. The first exchange nearly ended it. Angron was faster than anything that size had any right to be, and Gorechild came around in a horizontal arc that would have cut Kratos in half at the waist, and Kratos got both blades up and crossed and caught it, and the impact drove him back the full length of the rampart and off the broken end of it, and he fell 20 meters into the killing ground below with the Primarch already dropping after him. Kratos hit the ash and rolled and came up, and the ground where he had lain erupted as Gorefather buried itself to the haft. He had felt the blows of gods. This was in that country. This was Zeus's lightning made into a swung weapon and given legs. But Kratos had survived Zeus. Kratos had survived worse than Zeus. And the thing the Red Angel did not understand, the thing none of the gods of this galaxy or his own had ever understood until it was too late, was that Kratos did not tire the way mortal things tired, did not break the way mortal things broke, and had spent the entirety of a long and monstrous life learning exactly one skill above all others: how to kill a thing that was stronger than him. He gave ground. He took the Primarch's fury and he bled it. A cut across the reaching arm from a blade of chaos. A gash the frost axe opened along one vast thigh as Kratos ducked beneath a wing buffet that flattened a rockcrete bunker behind him. None of the wounds mattered on their own. Angron's demon flesh sealed them near as fast as they opened. But Kratos was not fighting to wound. He was fighting to understand, the way he understood every enemy, reading the rhythm of the nails, learning that the rage that made Angron unstoppable also made him blind, that a being who could only attack, could be led, could be positioned, could be made to overcommit. The valley shook with their fight. Twice Angron got a hand on him, once flung him through the wreck of a rhino transport, once slammed him down into the ash hard enough to crater it, and twice Kratos rose, ash-pale and bloodied and utterly, terribly patient, and came back in. The World Eater's host had gone silent watching it. The loyalists on the wall had stopped firing. Every eye in the valley was on the two chained things tearing at each other in the false dawn, and only one of them was still fighting to win. The other was fighting because he could not stop. And there is a difference, and across a long enough fight that difference is everything. It was near the end, though Angron did not know it was the end, that the person surfaced one last time. Kratos had put the Leviathan axe deep between the Primarch's collar and throat. Not a killing blow. Nothing was a killing blow on a thing this far into demonhood, but deep, and the frost of it spread through the black blood, and for a single second slowed the nail's fire. And in that second, the furnace eyes cleared, and Angron the person, Angron the slave king of a dead world, looked down at the ash-pale killer buried against his throat and said, in a voice that was almost quiet, almost sane, almost unbearable, "You cannot kill me. I have prayed for it. The gods will not let me die. They will pull me back. They always pull me back." A wet, ruined sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You said the choice is to hold your own leash. I lost that choice 10,000 years ago, on the sands of New Syria. There is nothing left in here to make it." The vast red hand closed slowly around Kratos, not yet crushing, almost gentle. "So do not free me, stranger. You cannot. Just end the killing you can. End me for as long as your strength lasts. It is the only mercy this galaxy has ever offered me, and it will not last." But the nails fired again, and the person drowned, and the hand crushed. Kratos was ready for it. He had heard the plea for what it was, not surrender, but a man asking to be stopped. And he had heard something in it that reached all the way back into his own buried country, the years he had begged the gods for a death they would not grant. He wrenched the axe free in a spray of black ichor, twisted in the crushing grip, and did the thing that had ended gods before. He stopped fighting to win, and fought to finish. Both blades of chaos went into the Primarch's chest to the hilt. The chains that bound them to his arms went taut, and Kratos poured into them everything. The fire of the blades that had been forged in a hell older than this one. The whole furnace of his own rage, not loosed and blind like Angron's but held, aimed. A controlled burn driven into the Red Angel's heart with the total focus of a being who had made an art of killing the unkillable. The fire went in, and it did not seal. It caught. Daemon flesh that had shrugged off bolt shells and last cannon burned. Because the fire of the blades of chaos did not ask a thing's permission to burn it. And Kratos drove it deeper, and deeper, and the whole valley filled with a light the color of a dying star. Angron screamed. It was rage, and it was agony, and, at the very end, for less than a heartbeat, it was something that might, in a kinder galaxy, have been relief. The Red Angel came apart in fire. The daemon in him would not truly die. Angron had spoken that truth, and it was a true one. Somewhere in the warp, the blood god would keep what was his, and in time, pull the shredded soul back and rebuild the weapon. But the body, the vast red engine of murder that had broken the loyalist wall, and would have broken 100 more, the thing that walked and killed on the material plane, that Kratos unmade. It burned from the heart outward, wings and nails and scarred flesh, until there was nothing on the ashen ground but a scorch, the shape of a fallen angel and 2 great chain weapons gone silent and cold. Silence fell over the valley of a kind that battlefields almost never know. Kratos stood in the center of the scorch, bleeding from a dozen wounds that were already closing, the blades of chaos hanging low and their fire guttering down to embers. He was not triumphant. He had killed a great many things and learned, across the long death march of his life, that there was no triumph in it, only the quiet after, and this quiet was heavier than most. He had not beaten an enemy. He had ended, for a while, the suffering of a fellow slave, and sent the rest of that slave back to the master who owned him. It was not a victory. It was a mercy. And mercies in this galaxy came at the point of a blade. On the wall above, the loyalists stared down at the impossible thing that had happened. In the valley, the World Eater's host, leaderless now, its living god burned to ash before their eyes, began, for the first time in the memory of any warrior present, to waver. And far out in the red immensity of the warp, on a brass throne at the heart of a mountain of skulls, the blood god, who had turned to watch a single point on a single dying world, now leaned close, closer than a god of murder had leaned toward a mortal thing in 10,000 years, and regarded the ash-pale killer who had just burned one of his chosen, off the face of the material plane. Khorne was not angry. That was the thing Kratos would come to understand, in time. A lesser god would have been angry. Khorne, the blood god, the lord of skulls who cared nothing for the why of a killing and everything for the killing itself, looked down at the being who had slain Angron's avatar with such total, controlled, magnificent violence, and Khorne was pleased. Here, rumbled a voice, like continents grinding, in a place beneath thought, aimed at the one soul in the valley proud enough to hear it and refuse it. Here is a skull worth the taking, or a hand worth the arming. You burned my son, and I do not grieve him. He was weak, he broke, he wept where he should have raged. But you, the presence pressed against the walls of the world, vast beyond the valley, vast beyond the world. You do not weep, you do not break. You have killed gods and worn their deaths like ash upon your skin. Serve me, Slayer, and I will not chain you as I chained him. I will set you loose. I will give you every enemy you have ever wanted dead, and call it worship. Blood for the blood god, and you have so much blood still in you. Kratos stood in the scorch where a Primarch had died, and lifted his eyes to the burning dark, and felt the whole weight of a galaxy's deadliest god bearing down on him with an offer that had once, at the dawn of his rage, been the only thing he ever wanted. He had heard this speech. He was so very tired of this speech. No, said the Ghost of Sparta, to the blood god of the 41st millennium, in the same flat and final voice he had used on Ares, on Zeus, on every power that had ever mistaken him for a weapon. I have burned one of your slaves free tonight. Do not think I will take his chains onto my own arms. And the fire on the blades of chaos, which had guttered to embers, climbed once more, not for the host in the valley, not for the wall, but as a promise flung up into the red dark itself. Come and collect your skull yourself, said Kratos. You will find I am harder to summon than I am to kill. The blood god did not answer with words. The blood god laughed, and the whole warp shook with it, because a god of murder had just been told no by the finest killer it had seen in an age. And to a thing like corn, refusal from the strong was not an insult. It was an invitation. The World Eater's host broke. It did not break the way mortal armies break, in rout, in panic, in men throwing down their weapons and running for the dark. The 12th Legion did not know how to run, but it had been built, hollowed out, and rebuilt around a single truth. And that truth was Angron. He was the reason the nails in their skulls could be born. He was the father who had taken the same wound they carried and worn it at the front of every charge. He was the living proof that the red joy in their heads was a gift and not a curse. And they had just watched an ash-pale stranger burn him to a scorch on the valley floor and stand over the ashes unbroken. So the host did not rout. It came apart into something worse. Without the Red Angel to aim them, 10,000 warriors with the butcher's nails firing in their skulls turned on the nearest living thing. And the nearest living thing, often as not, was each other. The valley that had been a siege became a massacre with no shape to it. World Eater falling on World Eater. Whole companies dissolving into the pure directionless slaughter the nails demanded when there was no hand to point them. Khorne, watching, was not displeased. Blood was blood, but it was not an army anymore. And the wall it had failed to take for 3 days was, abruptly, in no danger from it at all. Kratos walked out of that dissolving madness the way he had walked out of the cathedral, without hurry, killing only what came at him, letting the rest tear itself to pieces. He had no quarrel with a leaderless mob of slaves murdering one another. He had ended the one among them worth the ending. The rest would die by their own hands or the warps, and it was not his work to do. He climbed back to the loyalist wall as the true dawn finally cracked the ash-choked horizon, a thin, bloody line of light over a valley of the dead, and the sergeant who had stayed the trigger the night before was there to meet him. The loyalist Astartes had taken off his helm. His face beneath was a young old thing, transhuman and weathered, the face of a man who had fought through the whole long nightmare of the heresy, and expected to die in it. He looked at Kratos for a long moment, at the closing wounds, the guttering blades, the ash that was not all this world's ash, and he did not raise his weapon. I have fought in this war since it began, the sergeant said. I have seen loyal Primarchs and traitor Primarchs. I saw the angel fall on this wall 3 nights running, and I buried what he left of my brothers each time. I did not believe there was a thing in this galaxy that could stand before him. He glanced past Kratos, down at the scorch in the valley where a demigod had died. I still am not sure I believe it. What are you? It was the question everyone asked, in the end. Kratos gave the answer he had given the dying champion in the Great Hall, because it was the only one that had ever been fully true. A man who is done serving gods. He looked out over the wall, over the self-devouring host, over the burning fortress world at the bloodiest hour of its bloodiest war. Your galaxy is full of them, gods who make suns into weapons, gods who reach through fire for slaves and call it faith. Gods who reward the loyal by never letting them stop. Something old moved under the cold in his voice. I have lived in a galaxy like that. I burned it down. It did not make me clean, but it ended the lie that any of them were owed my knee. The sergeant was quiet. Then, carefully, the way a man tests thin ice. The war is not over. Horus still marches on Terra. The Emperor still. He stopped. There is a place in this fight for a thing that can kill a Primarch. If you would stand with the loyal. No. It was gentle for Kratos, but it was final. I have heard where that road goes. You want me to kill your enemies for your god, the way his priests wanted me to kill for theirs. Even the good masters want a weapon in the end, even the ones who fight for the right thing. He shook his head slowly. I will not be given a side. I will not be given a war. I have carried enough of other people's wars in my arms. He looked at the young old face, and there was, buried very deep, something almost like kindness. I fought here because these ones summoned slaves and called it strength, and I will not abide that, in this galaxy or any other. That is all it was. Do not make it a banner. He turned to go. Where? The sergeant asked. There is no world in the galaxy the war has not touched. There is nowhere left to be free of gods. Kratos paused at the broken end of the wall, and the thin bloody dawn lit the ash on his skin. Then I will make somewhere, he said. It is what I did before. A man walks far enough, kills enough of what hunts him, and eventually he finds a shore no god has bothered to claim yet. A pause. And when they come for it, because they always come, he teaches them why they should have left him alone. He went down off the wall and out into the ruined world, alone, the way he had always ended these things, and the loyalists let him go, because there was not a warrior among them who was fool enough to try to stop him. Far above, in the red immensity where the throne of skulls sat at the heart of a mountain older than the galaxy, the blood god watched the ash-pale figure walk out into the wastes, and considered. Khorne did not scheme. That was the province of the Changer of Ways, the four-faced liar whose plans wound through millennia. Khorne left the plotting to Tzeentch, and held only to the one clean truth of the skull and the blade. But even the simplest of the great powers understood want, and the blood god wanted this one. Not as a servant. Servants could be made from any legion, any warband, any furious mortal soul. Khorne had oceans of servants. He wanted this one the way a collector wants the single piece that does not belong in his collection, the way a hunter wants the beast that has killed every hunter sent against it. Angron had been a gift, once. A broken slave whose rage was a gift the moment the nails went in. This one was the opposite of a gift. This one had been offered every crown the powers could imagine, and had refused them all. Had killed his own pantheon rather than serve it. Had burned a daemon Primarch off the material plane, and then told the blood god of the 41st millennium no to his face. There was no delight in creation like the delight of a thing that refuses you. So Khorne did not strike him down, though the god could have flooded the wastes with demons, could have opened the world's thin skin and drowned the slayer in a tide of brass and slaughter. That was the tantrum of a small god. The blood god had eternity, and he had just found, on a nothing world at the edge of a rebellion that would be a footnote in 10,000 more years of war, a killer worthy of the long hunt. Walk. The presence rumbled, in the place beneath thought, and this time it did not sound like an offer. It sounded like patience. Walk your wastes, find your shore, kill what hunts you there and what hunts you after, and after. You told me I am harder to refuse than to kill. You are wrong, Slayer, but I will enjoy learning how wrong. I do not need your knee. Down in the ash, Kratos stopped walking. He felt it. He always felt them, the gods, when they leaned close. It was a thing his whole ruined life had taught him, the particular pressure of a great power turning its attention on a single soul. He had felt Ares. He had felt Zeus. He had felt Athena and Poseidon, and the whole doomed pantheon of a world he had burned. He knew exactly what it was, the weight bearing down on him out of the red dark, and he did not flinch from it, and he did not run from it, and he did not, this time, hurl defiance up into it. He had learned, across 2 worlds and more years than he cared to count, that defiance was a thing gods fed on almost as gladly as worship. Rage answered was still rage given. The one thing they could not use, the one thing that had finally set him beyond the reach of Olympus, was the thing he gave the blood god now. He simply kept walking. No answer, no challenge flung at the sky, no promise, no oath, no bargain, nothing for the god to catch hold of. He set the blades of chaos against his back, and he turned his face toward the thin, bloody dawn, and he walked into the wastes of a dying world with the total, unbothered calm of a man who had been hunted by gods his entire existence, and was still, against everything, here, still walking, still choosing, still the one who held his own leash. You will feed the war eventually, the blood god murmured, almost fond, as the distance grew. Everything in this galaxy feeds the war, even you. Even the ones who say no. Perhaps, said Kratos, aloud, to no one, to the dawn, to the god at his back, the first word he had granted it. Others have thought so. He did not say the rest. He did not need to. The rest was written in ash across a dozen dead pantheons, in the scorch of a fallen angel behind him, in the plain fact of his continued walking under the eye of a god who could not make him kneel. Others have thought so, and I buried them, and I am still here. The Ghost of Sparta walked out of the valley of the Red Angel and into the wider nightmare of a galaxy at war with itself. One more terrible thing loose in the grim darkness of the far future. Not for the Imperium, not for chaos, not for any throne or banner or god that would have him. Only for the quiet he had crossed an ocean of blood to earn, and would defend on whatever shore he found, against whatever the blood god sent, for as long as his strength lasted. And in the warp, on the throne of skulls, Khorne settled in to watch the long hunt begin, content, in the way of a god who has all of eternity, and has just found something in it worth chasing. Behind them both, the loyalist wall held under the true dawn. The war ground on, and on one nameless world among a million burning worlds, the killing that a single man could stop had, for one bloody hour, been stopped, which in the grim darkness of that galaxy was as close to mercy as anything ever came. It would have to be enough. It always had to be enough.